We are the average of the people we hang out with. I am Matthieu Stefani, serial entrepreneur and co-founder of Cosa Vostra, a tech and creative consulting agency. With Génération Do-It-Yourself, I offer you talks with entrepreneurs, sportsmen or artists who will literally make our average explode.
Exit windows. Mm-hmm. How many exit windows exist? And is there an efficient alignment of investors to those exit windows? You know, is there a 1-to-1 ratio of, for companies from 0 to 10 million, is there investors? From 10 to 20 million, there's investors. So that's one question, right? And another question, I think, is this idea of will investors adapt their expectations to settle for lower returns? So let's try to take that last one first. I think it's an interesting one. In every single venture capital fund model, there is a hope that every company is going to be successful, but there is an expectation that a percentage will be some subset of that. When I made the fund model for SeedCamp Fund 4, one of the things that I did was I took a percentage based upon all the companies that we saw and aligned that percentage multiplied by the multiple of return to the fund. So 10x, 9x, 8x, 7x, 6x, 2x, 1x, 1x. So the average investment was 100,000, just to pick a number. It would be something like a certain percentage of companies would give us 1x, right? 2x would be 200,000, 3x, 300,000, yep. And so. The breakdown was something like 1% would give us 10x or more. Anything between, let's say, 1x and 5x was more like 5%, and the rest was 1x or below. So as long as that model played out the way I expected it, the fund would return the promised 3 to 5x overall to our investors.
Yep. Within
that range, there is a happiness, a expectation that some companies will not be $1 billion or 500 million. They could be 50 million, and that's okay. So to address your question, all investors are okay with a variety of exits. But that being okay with an exit doesn't necessarily mean that it returns the fund. So I don't think any investor is unhappy with any kind of positive return on capital. I think that that's a good thing. It's always fine. And if it works out for everyone, there's a variety of companies that benefit from a good exit versus going to zero because they chose no exit. And there's a whole philosophy behind that statement.
We'll keep the other part of the question, but my comment on that is important. I think it's if you're an entrepreneur, mm-hmm. and if you go to a fund, yeah. a VC fund, a seed fund,
yeah.
and you don't show up with an idea that will be worth billions,
yeah.
I mean, what I'm saying is a large part of you guys will not invest because it's not worth the risk, right?
Sort of. This brings me to the first part of your question.
And that means...
let me tackle that one first, and then we'll come back to it.
Okay.
So that has to do with the efficiency of capital available for every stage of risk. Mm-hmm. So right now in this conversation, we've talked a little bit about the expectation is that every company's $1 billion. That's not entirely factually true. I think there's a percentage of companies that I would like for them to be over $1 billion, some that I would like for them to be over 500, some that I would like for them to be 100. And our fund is 143 million pounds. If our fund were 20 million, that number would be much lower. If our fund was 5 million, which is maybe what an angel's portfolio might look like, that would be even lower. And so the question you're asking is, how many investors exist for each one of those bands? So for example, if you're an angel and you invest 100,000, right? Getting a 10x, right? Getting $1 million return on that is really nice.
Yeah.
For you to have $1 million in a company, that exit doesn't have to be very big. Why? Because the ownership that angel is taking is not much to begin with. It'll probably be like a 5%. And then on top of that, you have the exit scenario, you probably only raised from 2 or 3 other angels, and that was your round. So you can have a 20 million exit with a bunch of angels, and everyone's happy. Okay, so is there enough angels to cover companies that only have a 20 million exit? I would say that that's much better today than it ever has been. This is why Crowdcube exists. This is why Seeders exists. This is why, if you look at most retail brands,
a lot of club deals,
exactly.
Just come in.
If you look at like drinks companies, or if you look at food or anything like that, those are retail companies. Those retail companies in public markets, the enterprise value multiple on revenues isn't very high because it just is an industry that is like a 2x or 3x multiple on revenues. And so that means that those companies can be working really hard, generating pretty good revenue, but they're never going to be worth billions of dollars or pounds. So you have 20 million exits, 50 million exits to a strategic buyer or something like that. Any angel who was in that company made a lot of money. The founder made a lot. Everyone's happy, right? But those deals are not the deals that maybe some of the bigger funds would invest in, because that return doesn't correlate to the risk they take. So Europe today has a high, like in London, in Germany, in France, in the Nordics, there is high efficiency of capital at the early and at the late early. So in other words, there's enough angels and enough seed stage funds to cover a lot of those kinds of investments. Where it gets trickier is in the late growth. That's where you see a lot of American funds coming in to supply capital for companies that are growing a little bit more, the growth capital side of things. That's where there's less money. So there is good data around this. I don't have it in front of me, but there's good data that showcases how many investors are investing at certain stages. And to your question, yes, people are happy at 20, at 30, at 50, 100. And so when we're having a conversation about a fund like mine, we're happy with 500 and higher, but we understand that some exits are 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100. And ultimately, my job is to make sure the founder's successful, right? And so, yes, of course, if we're talking about the ultimate return for the fund, it has to be 1 or 2 really amazing wins, a bunch of that are pretty good wins, some that are successful. But overall, it'll be fine. And what's more important to me is that the individual founder had a good experience and was successful as best they could be. And that, if I do that enough, you will have the numbers. And that's how the fund operates.